All right, we're going to call to order the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for April 29th, 2021. And first order would be roll call.
Looks like all current appointed members are present, and we do have a quorum.
Okay.
I guess we'll ask Margie to confirm that we have met the requirements of the Kansas Open Meetings Act in order to conduct a public meeting.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of today's meeting was provided.
So with a quorum and proper notice, we are ready to proceed with today's agenda.
Okay, so approval for the minutes from the February 18th, 2021 regular meeting.
I'll move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, that takes us on to new business, which would be public hearing item application V21-2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an application that's been filed by Ed and Ruth Robbins, and they're requesting a front yard setback variance of 2 feet from 17 feet, which is the minimum front yard setback required for a covered porch, to 15 feet to allow a front porch to extend out 10 feet into the front yard setback area on a residential lot. And the address of the property is 321 East Jewell. It's located on the north side of East Jewell Avenue, west of Quincy and west of Hughesner School. This property lies next to what's called the 2nd Street Slough, which is a concrete line channel that runs and carries stormwater from south to north and up into the old Smoky Hill River. And the applicant's lot is 85 feet wide and 120 feet deep. And the construction that's on the property now is a house that was built in 1949, a large detached garage that's been connected to the house by a covered breezeway. We noted in our report that at 900 square feet, it's larger than what could be built today, but at the time it was built, it was conforming. And we've kind of provided a summary, both chronologically and also as just to the area covered of the various construction projects on this lot. There was a building permit submitted for requesting a building permit to construct a new covered porch on the front of this dwelling. And in its review, city staff determined that the porch would extend out 10 feet into the front yard setback area along Jewell. And so staff informed the applicant that a building permit could not be issued for the porch cover as proposed because a open covered porch can only extend out 8 feet out into the front setback area. So they were given the option of modifying their plan to reduce the width to 8 feet or applying for a setback variance, and so they have applied for a front yard setback variance to allow a 10 by 30 foot covered porch to be constructed instead of an 8 by 30 covered porch. We've noted there that based on when they filed their application, they've been through 2 meeting cancellations, March 18th and April 15th. And so today's meeting was rescheduled as a special meeting due to a lack of a quorum at those meetings. So the language that's in question today is in our residential zoning districts. A new home or an existing home built in recent times, the front yard setback between the front property line and the front of the house, the minimum setback is 25 feet. There is another provision, though, that says if you want to have an open, unenclosed porch on the front of your house, that can project out 8 feet into that front yard. And so the conflict in this case is that the applicant's porch projects 10 feet into the front yard, and we don't have the authority to approve a covered porch that extends beyond 8 feet. So the purpose of the building permit review process is that's the means that we can inform owners about the building codes and limitations that are applicable to their property. So we did that in this case, and the Robins have chosen to file this application requesting relief from the setback requirement. So one of the things that, in terms of uniqueness, that the applicant points to is that the right-of-way for Jewel is 70 feet wide, which is greater than the current right-of-way width standards in the city, which are 60 feet. That means there's more green space behind the curb line before you get to the property line. So even though the porch would be closer to the property line, it won't be noticeably closer to the street because of the wider right-of-way. We would note that while the 70-foot is unique, it's not unique for this particular neighborhood where all the streets have a 70-foot right-of-way width. What we do see is unique about the property is that they have the Second Street slough bordering their property on the east instead of an adjacent neighboring house, and so the noticeable impact of the 10-foot porch is less because there's not an immediate neighbor to the east. As far as impacts on neighboring properties, the applicant states that neighboring properties should not be affected by the additional porch width because it will be an open porch. The house to the east across the slough faces Quincy, not Jewel. And so they've indicated that if the porch is approved, it won't be any closer to the street than the neighboring home to the east, so that won't change sight lines. There is, I guess, the distinction between an open porch is basically a concrete stoop or steps, and there's no shade structure overhead. A covered porch is one that has a roof and supports over it. And so constructing this will move the front facade of the house closer to Jewel. The house to the east does not have a 25-foot setback from Jewel. However, all the homes to the west are set back 25 feet or more. So in terms of hardship, the applicants state that they have an existing 10-foot open deck or porch, and they would have to reconstruct it in order to comply with the setback requirement. And so, from staff's perspective, we'd like the applicants to provide additional information about how the existing front porch is constructed and explain a little further why being limited to an 8-foot covered porch would result in an unnecessary hardship. So we did note that the house at Quincy and Jewel is set back 15 feet from Jewel Avenue, so it's not going to impact sight lines any more than that existing structure already does. And it's certainly not going to impact visibility for drivers backing into Jewel or any of those things. The main thing that the applicants point out is that the right-of-way width in front of their house is wider, which provides a greater distance between the curb and their house. And so our observation is that the purpose of having the setback is to preserve open space adjacent to public roadways, and also having a uniform build-to line maintains the visual appearance of the streetscape in residential neighborhoods. So in staff's view, a variance should only be granted or considered when there's physical characteristics on the lot that make that the only feasible option for expansion or new construction. So again, it's the fact that there's, from a physical standpoint, that the applicants state that the existing porch that they have is 10 feet wide, and it would be problematic to reduce it to 8. And so that's why we have the front yard setback variance process. And so their justification is that there's already an uncovered porch that extends that far into the yard. So as staff has analyzed this, you have on the one hand, the additional front yard encroachment would be relatively minor. It's only 2 feet. It's not readily noticeable to neighbors, and staff has not received any objections from any of the neighboring property owners. On the other hand, the applicant has failed to demonstrate any real uniqueness to their lot compared to the other lots on Jewel, other than they have a 10-foot uncovered porch. So the situation doesn't really relate to the uniqueness of the lot itself, but the uniqueness of the physical condition of the existing improvement that already exists. So in terms of your alternatives, you could approve the requested 2-foot front yard setback variance with or without any conditions. You could postpone consideration of the application and direct the applicant to provide additional information to help you reach a decision. Or you could deny the applicant's request if you don't think a variance is justified in this case. So from staff's perspective, we would request that the applicants provide additional information about the relationship between the existing deck and the proposed covered porch. If that information is provided to the board's satisfaction, then staff recommends that you balance the relative benefit gain from achieving compliance of having an 8-foot porch when no neighbor objects to the porch against the cost and financial hardship of modifying the existing deck or porch to have it extend only 8 feet. So again, staff is not that familiar with what the existing front porch consists of or how it's constructed, and so we would request that the applicant provide additional information about why it can't be modified to be 8 feet instead of 10. I would note that the only correspondence we received was an email from a neighboring property owner across the street to the south who indicated that they had no objection to the porch as proposed.
Okay. Any questions for staff?
Would I be correct in assuming that a permit is not required to build a porch? It's just the covered porch that requires a permit?
Right. So we answer those questions frequently, and the same thing would apply in the front of your house or the rear of your house. If you build a deck on the back of your house and it's less than 30 inches high, you don't need a permit to construct that deck or to have a concrete patio. If you go to the front of your house and your porch or deck is less than 30 inches tall, then you don't need a permit to construct that. And so the permit is required to put a cover on it. So a flat patio or flat deck less than 30 inches tall does not require a building permit, but any deck, whether it's on the front or the back, that has a cover on it has to have a building permit because of the footings and supports, wind load, snow load, things of that nature are what's looked at.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, can we hear from the applicant?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Hello?
Okay. I don't know. The main reason we want to do this is because we have a lot of sun, and it causes, we've put on several different doors, front doors, because the heat is tremendous. And aesthetically, I think it would add value to our property if we could do the 10-foot, because then you can have a porch where you can have the furniture and you can have a sitting porch where you have room.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the existing porch is built, whether it's concrete or wood, or what the current porch is made out of?
Composition,
Yes.
2x10 stringers. Or, excuse me, composite decking, geez, composition, geez.
So that's a composite material for the decking then?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Just faded.
Okay. And what's the depth there at the front before you get to the steps? How far is that out from the house?
That side is 7 foot, the other side's 10 foot.
Okay. So what you're wanting to be able to do is have it come out and cover that entire section there?
If we would like to.
And then is that the only reason that you're looking for the 10-foot variance, is to be able to cover that area?
No, basically, we want to kind of keep the sun off the front of the house because the windows get pretty warm, and the front door, like she said, we've replaced several front doors because they just get so much heat in there that it warps them.
And you don't feel that the 8-foot would accomplish the same thing as a 10-foot on keeping the front door covered?
Well, if we did the 8 foot, then if we wanted to set some furnitures out there, we wouldn't be able to have enough room to set, around the furniture. We feel like it'd be crowded.
We have a neighbor that has this short deck, and they can barely walk around with their furniture and everything. We want it to be usable, to enjoy, and I think, like I said before, if we ever decide to sell, it would be, I think it would help sell the house.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments for the applicant? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody in the audience or on?
We'll give it a
particularly
moment.
Zoom?
It does not look like there's anybody that's interested in speaking from the public.
Okay. At that point, then, we're going to close comment from the public and take it back up to discussion. So,
Okay.
thoughts or discussion? I understand the 10-foot on wanting to be able to cover the front deck part of it and being able to give yourself more room. Again, the question to me comes back into is, if there was a house to the east of it instead of the slough, and it changed it dramatically, I think would be less inclined to think that it doesn't, that it affects somebody. But the issue is now is if you do that, then you have the house next to it that's going to want to do the same thing. Then you have the house next to it that's going to want to do the same thing as a possibility, which is why we have the variant, the 8-foot setback initially. I don't see anything that's unique about the property itself or that would say that there's something unique about it besides the extra 2 feet on the front deck of the one area. Thoughts?
I would just echo your comments. It doesn't sound like there's anything that's unique to the property that would cause one to need a 10-foot deck versus an 8-foot deck. So at this point, I'm not necessarily seeing a need for a variance.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
I'll agree with
Somebody want to make a motion at this point then?
I'll make a motion to deny the applicant's request because of the findings of fact could not be made.
Okay, and this is for application V21-2. Okay, do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay, so a motion to deny has been made and seconded. All in favor of denial, say aye.
Aye.
We will communicate your decision to the applicants and let them know about their options.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to application V21-3.
Yes, and this application is for, it's been filed by Cord Gwinnett, and he is a contractor working for Cleary Buildings, and he has filed an application requesting that the board grant a front yard setback variance of 21 feet from 25 feet, which is our standard minimum front yard setback in most of our zoning districts, in this case C5 district, to 4 feet to allow a commercial storage building to be located within 4 feet of the front property line along North 8th Street. And this property is located on the west or east side of North 8th Street, just north of Pacific Avenue, and is addressed as 904 North 8th. And this property was formerly a residential property and had a dwelling on it, and that dwelling was removed because dating back to the 1960s, the Salina City Commission basically took a 120-foot deep strip along the north side of Pacific and zoned that commercial. And so that was just kind of a uniform depth of zoning, and it wasn't based on what the uses were. Some of the properties that were zoned commercial had residential dwellings on them, including this one. And so since 1977, this property has been zoned C5. And so it was viewed that East Pacific had some of the characteristics that would support C5 zoning. So Mr. Lonnie Wilson purchased 2 lots at the northeast corner of 8th and Pacific. He purchased one in 2011, and he purchased the other one in 2019, and they were acquired under the name of the Lonnie D. Wilson Revocable Trust. So although both lots were occupied by houses, the property was zoned C5. And recognizing this, Mr. Wilson came forward with a plan to remove the house at 904 North 8th and replace it with what we refer to as a non-climatized storage building. And what non-climatized storage building means is it generally doesn't have plumbing or heating or cooling or restrooms. It's just used for cold storage. And these types of commercial storage buildings are not allowed on residentially zoned lots, but they are allowed in the C5 district and in our industrial districts. And so a demolition permit was issued to demolish the house in 2019. And at that time, Mr. Wilson expressed a desire to leave the existing garage on the lot, which was allowed because this was a commercially zoned lot. In a residential setting, you can't have a garage without a house, so if you tear a house down, you have to tear the garage down with it. But in this case, because the property was zoned commercial and there was a desire to use it for commercial storage, the existing garage remained. In August of 2020, there was a building permit issued to construct a new metal storage building. Mr. Brian Davidson, who was a licensed contractor, was listed as the general contractor. And after the permit was issued, the mislocation of the building on the lot by the contractors was missed at the footing and foundation inspection stage, is what planning staff's understanding is, but it was noticed once vertical construction began. At that point, planning staff was called out to inspect the site and determined that the building was located a little over 20 feet closer to 8th Street than was shown on the approved site plan. So once planning staff went out and verified what the condition was, Mr. Hers sent a violation notice to Mr. Wilson, And that violation notice is attached to this report, and that notice was to inform Mr. Wilson that staff couldn't issue a certificate of occupancy and finalize the building because it was built in violation of the zoning ordinance. It was also built, it didn't follow the approved plan. So since that time, the building owner, property owner, Mr. Wilson, and the contractors have been at an impasse. And so, as a result, this front yard setback variance request has been filed. And so, it was filed on March 8th. It was originally set to be considered on the 15th. Due to a lack of quorum, the board agreed to hold this special meeting on the 29th, and this was carried over to today's meeting. And so, the applicant in this case is a contractor working for Cleary Buildings who is involved in erecting the building. The nature of this variance is a post-construction, after-the-fact front yard setback variance. The applicant is requesting that the board allow this non-climatized metal storage building to remain in its current location, 4 feet from the front property line. The justification for the requested variance is that during the footing and setback inspection, they were told by the city inspector that the footings and setback were good and they could proceed with vertical construction. They indicate that they relied to their detriment on the inspector's comments. So I want to clarify that although the property owner has signed the application, which is needed to file a variance application, it's not the property owner that's the applicant, it's the building contractor. On the application for building permit, or on the application for variance, the applicant subcontractor requests that the approval of an amended site plan and that the building be allowed to remain where it is. Well, in the application, they're asking that it be allowed to be 4 feet closer than what was approved. But in reviewing that, it's an indication to staff that the applicant still believes that the curb line is the property line. And so we want to clarify that even though the applicant is requesting a 4-foot variance, the actual variance being requested is 21 feet. And so staff has determined that the building was mislocated by over 20 feet. And so rather than relying on what was put into the application that was filled out, staff advertised this as a 21-foot setback variance, not as a 4-foot setback variance as indicated in the application. Staff believes that the origin of this building mislocation was that the contractors measured the front setback from the curb line instead of the front property line, and this is indicated on the drawing the applicant attached to the variance application, which shows the measurement of the building from the curb. So we've summarized for you on page 3 that on a residential street or a local street, which 8th Street is, the minimum building setback for a front yard is 25 feet. And the surrounding zoning is, this site is zone C5. To the north of this is single-family dwellings that are zoned residential. To the back side, to the east, is a contractor storage yard, which is zoned commercial. To the west, you have Dell's alternator and some single-family dwellings. And then south of this on the corner is a single-family dwelling. So in terms of looking at uniqueness, the applicant states that this was not created by the actions of the property owner or the applicant because the proper inspections were called at the correct time before the building was put up. The inspection passed and they were told they could proceed with construction. Staff disagrees with that. We believe that the need for a front yard setback variance was created by the actions of the contractor who measured the front building setback from the curb line instead of the front property line. General contractors who erect commercial and residential buildings are responsible for locating the property lines of the lot they're building on. And so one of the primary reasons that the city of Salina requires surveys as part of a building permit, both commercial and residential, is to ensure that everyone knows what the dimensions of the lot are and where the property boundaries are. So in the Salina Building Code, it states that a general contractor, their responsibilities include oversight and completion of the entire scope of work, including in a building permit, including without limitation, purchasing materials, hiring and paying subcontractors, and coordinating all work. And then the satisfactory completion of all permit requirements necessary to obtain a certificate of occupancy. And this could be clarified, but the general contractor in this case was Brian Davidson, because Cleary Buildings is not a licensed contractor. So, excuse me, the need for a setback variance in this case was created by human error. The only thing that's unique about this lot is the 80-foot right-of-way on North 8th Street, except there's nothing about this lot or this property that kept the building from being set back 25 feet from the property line instead of 4 feet. At this point, the primary obstacle is the cost of doing that. The applicant states that the building doesn't set any closer to the street than the building directly to the south at 900 North 8th Street. And that building actually sits about a foot closer than this does. And the staff would agree that the placement of this building is no closer to the 8th Street property line than the dwelling on the corner. The house itself is set back 10 feet from North 8th Street, but as we discussed in the previous case, it has a front covered porch that was added. And so we have surveyed the block and provided you with the setbacks that prevail on this block. And they range from 12 feet to 20 feet, but none of them are at 4 feet. The other thing about this case, the metal storage building that's built is not particularly attractive because of its metal exterior, its appearance. You wouldn't be able to put a building like this on a residential lot as a residential garage because it wouldn't be compatible with the houses on the block. And if it were a residential garage, it couldn't be located this close to the street. The fact that it's a metal commercial building actually increases its visual impact on the block. And from staff's perspective, it's noticeably closer to the street. The other thing that we would point out is that neither the owner or the contractor has proposed anything that might enhance the appearance of the building to try to reduce its visual impact on the neighborhood. The other thing about this project, and Mr. Hers can amplify that, but in a commercial building setting next to residential, there's a requirement to plant front yard landscaping. Well, if you have no front yard, there's no place to put the front yard landscaping, because where it was shown on the plan is occupied by building instead of by yard. And so nothing's been done to modify the appearance of the building to minimize the impact, and it's difficult to add landscaping because there's no place to put it. The applicant states that the undue and absurd cost of moving the building that has already been built at the current location should not be necessary because the inspection services the City of Salina told us we were okay to proceed with construction. And all those costs are unnecessary and undue to the owner because of the City of Salina inspector's mistakes. So again, staff would disagree. If the building does not have to be relocated, or if it does have to be relocated, staff would note it's because the contractor did not follow the approved site plan and was mistaken as to the location of the front property line. Under Kansas law, property owner and the contractor are just as responsible to be knowledgeable of local zoning laws as a local zoning or building official. The contractor had an obligation to build the building in accordance with the approved site plan, regardless of the actions of any city inspector. Even if the contractor didn't know where the front property line was, on the site plan, the new building was to be located 15 feet west of the existing garage. And in fact, it's located 35 feet west of the garage, and that should have been an indicator that the location of the building was off. The applicant states this building doesn't sit any closer to the street than other buildings on the same street, does not inhibit vision or create any safety concerns. Again, staff would disagree with both statements. The prevailing setback of the dwellings located on this block is 20 feet. There are two homes north of this lot that have 12 and 14-foot setbacks. These are homes that date from the 20s and 30s. This is new construction, and it's set back only 4 feet from the front property line. One of the reasons that garages and storage buildings are required to be set back 25 feet from the property line is to allow for vehicles to pull in and park and without overhanging into the street or the street right away. In this case, we have an overhead door, we have a driveway, and there's no room for a vehicle to pull in and park in front of the overhead door without hanging into 8th Street, creating a potentially unsafe traffic condition. So if the board is inclined to allow the building to remain as is, staff would recommend that the driveway approach be removed. Applicant states that there's no reason granting this variance will degrade the general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance because the building is not unsightly, nor does it look out of place. On the other hand, not granting this variance could sour the views of the City of Salina and their inspection department. While the applicant may have a sour view of the City of Salina and the Building Inspection Division, staff would note that it's not staff's primary role to promote and protect the interests of individual building contractors. Our primary role is to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and that includes neighboring property owners as well as the owner of this property. Replacing a dwelling that was set back 20 feet from the front property line with an unattractive metal building set back only 4 feet from the front property line is not an improvement to the block. And so, had the building been proposed in this location, it would not have been, the building permit would not have been approved. And so, we did require the property to be surveyed. There was a site plan submitted with the building permit application, and we would not have approved the permit had the site plan not met those requirements and had a survey not shown where the property line was. So this request for relief is based on the contractor's failure to follow the approved site plan and his mistaken belief that the curb line was the property line. So from staff's perspective, if we were to approve a post-construction after the fact variance for a building that was mislocated by more than 20 feet, it would undermine the very purpose of requiring surveys and to scale site plans and for locating property pins. So your options this afternoon would be to approve a post-construction building setback variance to allow the storage building to remain as is due to the financial hardship on the applicant if the building had to be relocated. You could allow the building to remain as constructed, subject to making certain physical modifications to the building to make it more attractive and subject to other conditions such as removal of the driveway. You could postpone consideration of this request to a future meeting date, or you could deny the applicant's request for a post-construction as-built variance and direct staff to pursue other options. As a staff, we're not able to approve or recommend approval because we don't believe it's unreasonable to expect commercial building contractors to locate property pins or property corners or to follow approved site plans. There's just no physical condition on this property that either prevented or now prevents this building from being set back 25 feet from the front property line. So with that, I'd be open to any questions that you have. We have Sean Pilcher, the city's building official, if you have questions of him. Mr. Hers was involved in the plan review and also sent the notice to the property owner. So if you have any questions about that, you could direct those to Mr. Hers.
Questions for staff?
I have a couple questions. When locating the building, is it the city's expectation to go from property pins or to actually have the corners of the building surveyed by the surveyor?
I'll let Mr. Pilcher address that question. See, he's more familiar with what work is done in the field.
Sean Pilcher, building official for the city. It is not, at the time this was done, it is not a requirement for the surveyor to locate the corners of the building. The surveyor provides the survey to the city for review, and especially on properties such as this, sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't located by the surveyor. But it's not, at the time this was built, it wasn't a requirement.
My second question is, within the city of Salina, is it common or uncommon for the property lines to be at the curb?
Uncommon. Yeah,
Thank you.
they're never at the curb.
Thank you.
If you don't mind. So property lanes are typically going to be, can we take back to one of the photos that shows the property just to the north of it also? So, yeah, show the property to the north. I think there was a photo earlier. Yeah, is there one that was kind of closer that was showing like that drive next to it?
This is to the south, but I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, it was the other one. There was one in there earlier. I thought
Showing
that,
the front view of the
yeah,
building?
front view of that
Like
building
the
and the
proposed
property
driveway
to
would
the
be?
north of it.
I'll keep looking here.
Yeah, right there. So if you look where the trash can's at, so you've got a drive that's set right there, and then you've got the cutout that's basically the sidewalk, correct?
Yes, that, forgot my pointer, Dustin, you have your pointer. But that, what Dustin's pointing to in a driveway, that's what's called the sidewalk section. And so even on streets that don't have a full sidewalk section is put in the driveway. And so that sidewalk section is, the back of that sidewalk is an indication of where the property starts.
Right. So the sidewalk is not your property, it's still part of the city property. So the back side of that becomes the
sidewalk is located in the
property
public
line.
right-of-way, and usually your property starts just behind the sidewalk.
So even if you would have looked to the north and looked at the driveway and looked at the sidewalk line, you would have seen where the property line would have been.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
If you have anything you wanted to add about the landscaping, Mr. Hers?
I can get to that in a moment, but as we went through the staff report, we had a number of slides, and I thought I'd just add a little context to them. This is from the north, looking south, and this is standing on the property line. So right where I was standing to take the picture is the property line going all the way straight back here like this, and the building virtually goes up to the property line, and so you can kind of get a visual context of how the other buildings compare in terms of how close they are to the proposed building that's been constructed and erected. We did the same thing on the south, where this one, the porch is really close to the property line. The building itself is set back around 10 feet. And so you can see here that this van is virtually completely in the right-of-way, not totally, but pretty close. And so if we were to have a driveway up off of the front of the building, it would virtually take up the entire front area and would have, if you had a longer truck, you wouldn't be completely on private property potentially. And then in terms of the landscaping, we do have required front yard landscaping areas, and that is the front 25 feet of the property, and it is required to be green space with plantings. And if the building, which is currently set here instead of here, you wouldn't have as much area in the front yard. It'd be almost like side yard landscaping, because it'd be on the north and south sides of the building. And so that's another concern. And if there's any other questions, we'll address those.
I have a quick question. Partial 2, which is that house we were just looking at, I think we were looking south at the new construction. Just the last photo you had up that showed the house. Yes, that house. So this house that we're looking at right here, it is currently zoned commercial property. Am I correct?
Yes.
Which means-
There's 2 lots there,
Okay.
and the commercial zoning goes back 2 lots deep, and then from there to the north is all residential.
So if at some point that house were to be demolished and someone wanted to erect a non-climatized cold storage building, that new building would have to be set back to meet the current city code, because the current house on there was built prior to the current code regulations?
Right. So what's there today would be considered non-conforming or grandfathered in, but once you remove it, you're required to build back to what the current standard is. So if you had a non-climatized storage building on that, it would also have to be set back 25 feet or perhaps turned the other direction because of the shape of the lot.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. If not, we will hear from the applicant.
Any questions you guys have for me?
I guess my first question would be, I understand you're looking for the variance, but I guess my first question would be is how is the setting it that close not an issue on your end?
Well, I'm not going to accept or deny blame. I mean, there was issues from multiple people. If the city, doesn't want to accept that they signed off and did the setback when I held the tape measure for the guy, that they can say what they want to say. I'm not going to deny blame nor accept all blame. The mistakes were made. There's no doubt about it.
Okay. Questions for the applicant from staff or from board?
Is this building just sitting on a concrete slab?
It's considered post-frame construction. It's the foundation is in ground.
Okay.
So Going back to your statement earlier, so you were, when you said that you had city staff holding a tape measure, kind of explain that process.
Well, he was by himself. He was measuring the setbacks. I was holding the tape measure for him.
And who was it that measured the setbacks?
Mr. Smith, I believe.
So do we know who would have signed off on it from city staff then?
Well, it wasn't so much as signed off, but Building Inspector Mark Smith went to the site to do what we understood to be the footing and foundation inspection.
Okay. So can you explain that process, what the footing and foundation inspection would be?
I will let Mr. Pilcher explain how that works.
Sean Pilcher, building official again. When a contractor calls out for a footing inspection, we'll go and check their approved documents, make sure that the footings are the correct depths, things like that. A lot of times on commercial properties, the setbacks are the pins and it's located by the surveyor. In this case, it wasn't, and I've spoken with the inspector about it, and he doesn't really have a reason as to how or why the mistake was made on the setbacks, but he did indicate that yes, he and Cord did measure it together to try and gain that it was correctly set, but like Mr. Winkamp said, that mistakes were made.
Okay. Thank you. Unless anybody else has questions? Okay. So, Mr. Cord, do you have any other comments that you would like to make?
No, not particularly.
Okay. And then is there anybody from the public, either on Zoom?
We'll see if anybody raises their virtual hand or wants to speak here. Give them a moment. Does not appear so.
Not appear. Okay. We're going to close public comment for this then, and then take it back to discussion for the board. So, questions, comments, thoughts?
I don't see how there's any way we can improve this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well-
You go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was just going to say, from my perspective, I'm looking for a uniqueness of the property or some other variance, but it sounds to me like that's not an issue at this point in time.
Yeah, and I would agree that there's not a uniqueness for this property, and unfortunately, I think that it sounds like there was mistakes made on multiple parties throughout this entire process. Unfortunately, mistakes being made by a contractor that should know whether they are or not. I mean, that is part of the definition of what the general contractor should be doing, is going back and throughing it. It was approved based on a site plan that did have correct dimensions. It was not then correctly constructed per that, which would be a mistake on their end. I agree that there was a mistake on the city's end, that at the point that they went out and looked at the foundation, that somebody should have noticed that it was set farther up than what it should have been. So I think that at this point, there are mistakes, but on our part of it, I would agree that I would not agree to a variance of this much based on this property. The non-conforming properties, as Steve pointed out before, they were already there before this went into effect, but anything new going into it needs to hit those standards, and there's not a reason that this shouldn't have.
I agree.
So any other discussions or thoughts? Okay. Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll move that the board deny the applicant's request for post-construction as built the setback variance and direct staff to pursue other options.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right, so it's been motioned and seconded. All in favor of denying the application, say aye.
Aye.
So moved.
bring us to, we have no administrative items this afternoon. Both of our items were public hearing items, and in terms of any unfinished business, we let the board know that we have reached out to the city clerk, to the city manager's office, and to have them reach out to the mayor and commissioners, telling them that this board can't fulfill its mission if it only has 4 members, that we're just too close to quorum line there. And so we have expressed a need for commissioners and the mayor to go out and look for candidates who might want to serve on this board, and the sooner the better. And so we are reaching out and making that effort. I can say, at least for the near future, that we have 3 applications that have been filed for your May 20th meeting. And so that's the next scheduled meeting after today. And so we have 3 cases for that agenda, so that meeting will be held. And if there's any difficulties that any of you might have with being able to participate in that meeting, the sooner we can know, the better, and perhaps adjust. But the best solution right now would be to have a full membership of 7 members, and then we wouldn't be worrying about quorums like we are. So we recognize that, and we're doing what we can to remedy that situation.
Well, we appreciate that. Or I do. So that takes us to unfinished or other business, so it goes back to public forum. Is there any comments from the public?
Does not appear so.
Okay, so public forum is closed. Takes us up to adjournment.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn our meeting.
Okay,
Second that.
all right, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming in on a beautiful day and joining us here. I think we'll continue in this same hybrid mode that will accommodate both Zoom participation and in-person meeting, but all of our, I think we had a Heritage Commission meeting, it was about half and half. I think, if I recall, for Planning Commission, we had all of our members
Planning,
present, yeah.
yeah, planning, everybody was here. No, Mr. Baffa was not.
Okay.
We had everybody but Mr. Baffa.
So it's still your choice, but as far as staff goes and everything else, the meetings will be advertised as being physically here, and then the ability for others to join via Zoom, or for you to join via Zoom, whatever makes you comfortable. So,
Well, we appreciate it.
but we'll be back here May 20th, and for your benefit, Mr. Olson, the May 4th Planning Commission will not be held, but there will be one on May 18th.
May 18th.
Yeah, which is that would be the May meeting would occur on the 18th instead of the 4th.
Okay.
If I have that right. May 20th is Thursday, so May 18th would be
Correct.
Tuesday.
Okay. And the reason that one got moved back?
Just because there's nothing filed in time for May 4th, and the only thing we had filed only worked to do May 18th, so we didn't. We're still trying to do one meeting a month, and it's just going to happen on the 18th instead of the 4th.
Okay. I didn't know if we were going to start to move to 2 for the planning and zoning,
Well,
or,
we're starting to see a lot of applications coming forward, and so I think there's a possibility that we may have to go back to
the
twice a
2.
month.
Okay.
Well, in the spirit of being able to meet, the week of June 17th, which is where I think we're currently scheduled to meet on,
Mm-hmm,
I will not be in the county.
okay.
Yeah, I'll be.
And we know Madison will not, and so that will, she'll be indisposed at that time, and so we'll,
At least we technically have 5 members on the board. What do you think about that?
You can't vote.
so we'll hope to have it remedied by then, or we'll hope to deter anybody from filing anything for June. But the things that, 2 of the 3 items for the May meeting are fairly time-sensitive in the view of the applicants, and so moving them to a different schedule wasn't simply not going to work. So we have the 3 items for you May 20th, and we can't see far enough ahead to see June. So, but we appreciate any advance notice that we get.
Thank you. Unless we get